What if I told you that walking, the exercise everyone recommends for seniors, does almost nothing to strengthen the muscles that actually control your breathing, and that there's a different approach that can rebuild your lung capacity in half the time with half the effort? Right now, millions of people over 60 are walking religiously, following doctors' orders, doing everything they're supposed to do, yet their breathing continues to get weaker because walking simply doesn't target the respiratory muscles that determine how well you can breathe. Meanwhile, a specific type of training that takes just 10 minutes a day and doesn't even require you to leave your chair is rebuilding breathing strength in seniors who had almost given up hope. This isn't about giving up walking, which has cardiovascular and other benefits. This is about understanding that when your primary problem is weak breathing, walking alone will never fix it, because walking exercises your legs and heart, not the muscles that power your lungs. Your diaphragm, the primary breathing muscle, can be as weak as a deflated balloon from decades of shallow breathing, and no amount of walking will make it stronger. But 10 minutes of specific respiratory muscle training can transform a weak diaphragm into a powerful breathing engine that makes every breath easier. In the next few minutes, I'm going to reveal why walking fails to improve breathing strength in most seniors, what type of training actually works to rebuild respiratory muscles, and exactly how to do this training starting today with no equipment and no physical strain. I'll show you the science proving this approach works better and faster than walking for breathing improvement. And I'll share the remarkable transformations of people over 60 who went from struggling to breathe to breathing powerfully again, not through more walking but through targeted respiratory muscle training that addresses the actual problem. Your breathing could transform in the next few weeks if you stop relying on walking alone and start doing what actually strengthens the muscles that control every breath. If you're over 60 with weak breathing, you've probably been told to walk more. Your doctor said it would help your lungs. Health articles recommend walking for respiratory health. You might have started a walking routine specifically to improve your breathing. Maybe you've been walking for months or even years, faithfully following the advice, but your breathing hasn't improved the way you expected. You still get winded climbing stairs. You still struggle with activities that require sustained effort. You might even feel more discouraged because you're doing what you're supposed to do and it's not working. Here's the truth that most doctors don't explain when they recommend walking. Walking is excellent cardiovascular exercise. It strengthens your heart, improves circulation, helps with weight management, and provides many other benefits. But walking does very little to directly strengthen your respiratory muscles, the diaphragm and intercostal muscles that actually move air in and out of your lungs. When you walk, you breathe faster and somewhat deeper to supply oxygen to your working leg muscles, but this increased breathing rate doesn't provide resistance training for your respiratory muscles the way targeted exercises can. Think of it this way. If your arm muscles were weak and someone told you that walking more would strengthen your arms, you'd know that doesn't make sense. You need to specifically exercise your arms with resistance to make them stronger. The same principle applies to breathing muscles. Your diaphragm is a muscle just like your bicep. It needs specific resistance training to get stronger. Walking increases the demand on your respiratory system but doesn't provide the resistance training that builds strength. This is why so many seniors faithfully walk for exercise but continue to experience declining breathing capacity. They're addressing cardiovascular fitness but not respiratory muscle strength. The two are related but not the same. You can have a strong heart but weak breathing muscles, which is actually a common situation in seniors who exercise regularly but still struggle to breathe. The frustration of doing everything right but not getting the results you need in the area that matters most, your ability to breathe, is devastating. Thousands of seniors who discovered respiratory muscle training and added it to their routine, whether or not they continued walking, have experienced transformations that finally gave them the breathing improvement they'd been seeking. People who had been walking for years without breathing improvement found that just 2 weeks of respiratory muscle training produced more noticeable change than months of walking. Individuals who couldn't walk much due to severe breathlessness found they could do respiratory muscle training sitting in a chair and still build the breathing strength that eventually allowed them to walk comfortably again. Let me explain exactly why walking doesn't strengthen your breathing muscles and what type of training does. Your ability to breathe depends primarily on the strength of your diaphragm, the dome-shaped muscle that sits below your lungs and does about 70% of breathing work when functioning properly. When your diaphragm contracts, it moves downward, creating negative pressure that pulls air into your lungs. When it relaxes, it moves back up, helping push air out. You also have intercostal muscles between your ribs that expand your chest cavity to help draw air in. In most people over 60, the diaphragm has become significantly weaker than it was in youth. This happens for several reasons. Decades of shallow breathing mean the diaphragm rarely works through its full range of motion or contracts with much force. Aging causes some natural muscle loss, including in the diaphragm. Postural changes that come with aging, like forward head posture and rounded shoulders, mechanically disadvantage the diaphragm. Many seniors have shifted to breathing primarily from their chest using accessory muscles, which means their diaphragm is barely working at all. A weak diaphragm means every breath requires more effort. You're not moving much air with each breath, so you have to breathe faster to get enough oxygen. Physical activities become exhausting because your weak breathing muscles can't efficiently deliver the oxygen your body needs. You feel breathless with minimal exertion, not because your lungs are diseased but because the muscles that power your breathing are too weak to do their job effectively. Now here's why walking doesn't fix this problem. When you walk, your breathing rate increases to supply oxygen to your working muscles. You might breathe twice as fast or even faster during brisk walking compared to rest. But breathing faster with a weak diaphragm doesn't make the diaphragm stronger. You're not providing resistance that forces the muscle to work harder than it's capable of, which is what's required for strength gains. You're just doing more repetitions of weak contractions, which doesn't build strength any more than waving your arms rapidly would build arm strength. For a muscle to get stronger, it needs to work against resistance that challenges its current capacity. This is why strength training uses weights or resistance bands. You're forcing muscles to work harder than they normally do, which triggers adaptation and strengthening. The same principle applies to respiratory muscles. To strengthen your diaphragm, you need to make it work against resistance, breathing in or out against something that makes the breathing harder than normal. This resistance training for breathing muscles is called respiratory muscle training, and it's dramatically more effective than walking for improving breathing strength. The consequences of relying solely on walking when you have weak breathing muscles are continued decline and frustration. You're putting in effort and time but not addressing the actual problem. Your cardiovascular system might improve from walking, but if your breathing muscles remain weak, you'll continue struggling to breathe. Many seniors eventually give up on exercise entirely because they're discouraged that all their walking hasn't helped their breathing, when the truth is they were doing the right type of exercise for cardiovascular health but not for respiratory muscle strength. Now let me teach you the respiratory muscle training approach that actually strengthens breathing muscles and produces the improvement that walking cannot. This training has two main types: inspiratory muscle training that strengthens the muscles you use to breathe in, primarily your diaphragm, and expiratory muscle training that strengthens the muscles you use to breathe out, primarily your abdominal muscles and internal intercostals. Inspiratory muscle training can be done with a simple device or with DIY methods. The principle is creating resistance as you breathe in, making your diaphragm and other inspiratory muscles work harder than normal. The simplest DIY method is breathing through a straw or small opening that restricts airflow. Take a regular drinking straw, place it in your mouth, pinch your nose closed, and breathe in slowly through the straw. The narrow opening creates resistance your diaphragm must work against. Breathe in as deeply as possible through the straw, then remove it and breathe out normally through your mouth. Do 10 repetitions, rest for a minute, then do another set. Work up to 3 sets twice daily. A more precise method uses an inspiratory muscle trainer, a small handheld device with an adjustable valve that controls how much resistance you breathe against. These devices are relatively inexpensive and allow you to progressively increase resistance as your muscles get stronger, just like adding more weight as you get stronger in traditional exercise. You breathe in through the device, which creates resistance, then remove it and breathe out normally. Following a structured protocol, typically 30 breaths twice daily, most people see significant strength gains within 4 to 6 weeks. Expiratory muscle training strengthens the muscles used for forceful breathing out and coughing, which are important for clearing mucus and for activities that require sustained exhalation. The simplest method is pursed lip breathing with forced exhalation. Breathe in normally through your nose, then exhale as slowly and forcefully as possible through pursed lips, using your abdominal muscles to push every bit of air out. The pursing creates resistance that makes your expiratory muscles work harder. Do this for 5 minutes twice daily, focusing on making each exhalation as complete and controlled as possible. Another excellent method is blowing into a partially filled water bottle. Fill a plastic bottle about 1/4 full with water. Place a straw in the bottle so it reaches below the water line. Blow forcefully into the straw, creating bubbles in the water. The water creates resistance that your expiratory muscles must work against. Continue blowing for as long as you can, rest, then repeat. This simple exercise is remarkably effective at strengthening expiratory muscles and is often used in hospital rehabilitation programs. The key to success with respiratory muscle training is consistency and progressive overload, just like any strength training. Start with whatever resistance level is challenging but doable for you. As you get stronger, increase the resistance or duration to continue challenging your muscles. Most people should do respiratory muscle training twice daily, morning and evening, for about 10 minutes per session. This small time investment produces far more breathing improvement than hours of walking in terms of respiratory muscle strength. Let me tell you about Robert, a 67-year-old man who had been experiencing progressively worse breathing for several years. His doctor recommended walking for exercise and lung health, so Robert started walking 30 minutes every day. He continued this routine faithfully for 8 months, but his breathing didn't improve. He still got winded going upstairs, still struggled to keep up with his wife during their walks, still felt like he couldn't get enough air during any sustained activity. Robert became discouraged and mentioned to his doctor that walking didn't seem to be helping his breathing. The doctor referred him to a respiratory therapist who assessed his breathing mechanics and found that Robert's diaphragm was extremely weak. The therapist explained that while walking was good for his heart, it wasn't strengthening his diaphragm, which was the actual problem causing his breathing difficulty. She taught Robert inspiratory muscle training using a resistance device and also taught him the forced exhalation exercises. Robert was skeptical that such simple exercises could help when months of walking hadn't, but he committed to doing them twice daily as instructed. Within 2 weeks, Robert noticed he wasn't getting as winded during his daily walk. Within a month, he could climb stairs without feeling breathless. After 6 weeks of respiratory muscle training, Robert's breathing strength had improved so dramatically that he could keep up with his wife easily during walks and engage in activities he'd been avoiding for years. When Robert returned to his respiratory therapist for follow-up testing, his inspiratory muscle strength had increased by over 40%. The therapist wasn't surprised, explaining that this is the typical response to consistent respiratory muscle training. Robert now does his breathing exercises religiously every morning and evening, and he continues walking for cardiovascular health, but he credits the respiratory muscle training with transforming his breathing in ways that walking alone never did. The beauty of respiratory muscle training is that it's accessible to almost everyone regardless of physical limitations. You can do it sitting in a chair. You don't need to go anywhere or have any special fitness level. If you're too breathless to walk comfortably, you can still do respiratory muscle training, and as your breathing muscles strengthen, walking will become easier. Many people find that adding respiratory muscle training to their routine makes all their other activities, including walking, easier and more enjoyable because they're finally addressing the underlying weakness that was limiting them. You should continue walking or other cardiovascular exercise if you're able, as it provides benefits beyond respiratory muscle strength. But add respiratory muscle training as the specific intervention that targets breathing weakness directly. The combination of cardiovascular exercise for overall fitness and respiratory muscle training for breathing strength provides comprehensive benefits that neither approach alone can deliver. Respiratory therapists and pulmonologists who specialize in rehabilitation have known for decades that respiratory muscle training is more effective than general exercise for improving breathing strength. Research studies comparing respiratory muscle training to walking or other aerobic exercise consistently show that respiratory muscle training produces greater improvements in inspiratory muscle strength, lung capacity, exercise tolerance, and breathlessness during activities of daily living. Clinical trials have documented that respiratory muscle training can increase inspiratory muscle strength by 30 to 50% within just 4 to 8 weeks of consistent practice. Studies following people over longer periods show that these strength gains are maintained as long as training continues, and they translate to real-world improvements in functional capacity and quality of life. Research in elderly populations specifically has found that respiratory muscle training improves breathing more effectively than walking, particularly in people with already weakened respiratory muscles. The insider knowledge that respiratory specialists share is that respiratory muscle weakness is extremely common in people over 60 but is rarely addressed in routine medical care. Doctors typically don't assess respiratory muscle strength unless someone is hospitalized with severe respiratory problems. By the time weakness is recognized and addressed, significant functional decline has often occurred. If more seniors knew about respiratory muscle training and started doing it preventively in their 60s, many cases of severe breathlessness and respiratory decline could be prevented or minimized. Here's something that will change how you think about breathing and exercise. Research comparing athletes who do cardiovascular training to people who do respiratory muscle training has found that the respiratory muscle training group often has superior breathing capacity and efficiency despite doing less overall exercise. The reason is that targeted training produces specific adaptations in the muscles being trained. You can't achieve respiratory muscle strength through nonspecific cardiovascular exercise any more than you can achieve strong biceps without ever using your arms. The revelation that surprises many people is how quickly respiratory muscle training produces noticeable results compared to walking. While cardiovascular improvements from walking might take weeks or months to become apparent, respiratory muscle strength can increase measurably within just 2 weeks of training. People often notice subjective improvements, feeling less breathless during activities, even sooner. This rapid response occurs because you're directly challenging and strengthening the specific muscles that were weak, producing adaptation much faster than indirect training through increased breathing demand. When you add respiratory muscle training to your routine and experience real improvement in your breathing strength, the psychological transformation is profound. After months or years of walking without breathing improvement, finally finding something that works feels validating and hopeful. You realize that your breathing weakness wasn't irreversible, it was just being addressed with the wrong approach. The confidence that comes from breathing more easily affects everything from your willingness to engage in activities to your overall mood and energy. People who successfully incorporate respiratory muscle training describe feeling empowered by the simplicity and effectiveness of the approach. 10 minutes twice daily, something anyone can fit into their schedule, produces real, measurable change. There's no need for expensive equipment, gym memberships, or outdoor conditions to be just right. You can do this training consistently regardless of weather, health issues that might prevent walking, or time constraints. The reliability and accessibility of the approach makes it sustainable long-term. We've covered why walking isn't enough to strengthen weak breathing after 60. Walking exercises your cardiovascular system and legs but doesn't provide the resistance training your respiratory muscles need to get stronger. We've revealed what does work: respiratory muscle training that specifically strengthens your diaphragm and other breathing muscles through resistance breathing exercises. Inspiratory muscle training using straws, devices, or other methods that create inhalation resistance. Expiratory muscle training using pursed lip breathing or blowing into water to create exhalation resistance. 10 minutes twice daily of these targeted exercises produces more breathing improvement than hours of walking. The question isn't whether respiratory muscle training works better than walking for breathing strength. Research and clinical experience prove it does. The question is whether you're going to add this 10-minute practice to your daily routine starting today or continue relying on walking alone and wondering why your breathing isn't improving. Here's what you need to do right now. Get a regular drinking straw. Sit comfortably, pinch your nose, and breathe in slowly through the straw 10 times. Notice how much harder your breathing muscles have to work against that resistance. That challenge is what builds strength. Tomorrow morning, do 3 sets of 10 breaths through the straw. Tomorrow evening, do it again. Within 2 weeks, you should notice you're getting less winded during daily activities. Within a month, the improvement should be obvious. Walking is wonderful for many aspects of health, but it's not sufficient for building breathing strength when your respiratory muscles are weak. Respiratory muscle training addresses the actual problem directly, efficiently, and effectively. 10 minutes today could start the transformation that gives you back the breathing strength you thought was gone forever. Make the choice now to add this simple practice to your routine. Your breathing muscles are waiting for the training they desperately need. Begin today.